Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we are breaking down the Week 4 Friday slate of college football DFS. That is for Friday, September 20th. If you are looking for our preview of the main slate, the one that starts on Saturday, that one came out yesterday. So make sure to scroll back in the channel feed or on the audio feed if that's where you're listening, because we broke down all 13 games. It was a jumbo-sized slate that DraftKings gave us. We broke down all 13 games in that one and talked about all the best plays for the Saturday slate. So make sure you go check it out if you have not already. But today we're talking about a 3-game Friday slate that, they're not necessarily the best matchups on paper in terms of like watchable games or games with significance for the college football playoff. But for DFS purposes, these are 6 really good offenses to target. These are some teams where I think they're going to be pretty predictable in what they're going to do on Friday night. And I think that there's going to be clear paths to building lineups that have both, the top plays and leverage built in. So I really think this is an interesting slate, and I'm really looking forward to diving in. We got 3 games, so we're going to try to keep it about 20 minutes. But as always, y'all, we're going to tell you everything you need to know about these 3 games. Hopefully do it in a way that is entertaining, have some hot takes, tell a few jokes, have a little fun, but tell you guys everything you know to build some good DFS lineups for the Friday night slate. If you're not already, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We are closing in on 700 subscribers on YouTube, which is quite a milestone for us. We started the season for college football at about 480. So the fact that we've already grown over 200 subscribers is impressive, and I want to keep growing even more. Growth of YouTube channels is supposed to be exponential, and I'm a high school math teacher, so I know that the shape of that graph is supposed to be flat, and then it's supposed to take off, right? So we can only take off if people like you that are watching hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Help me out and do that. And if these videos help you out in a way, please hit the like button. It helps me out a ton when you guys do that. Helps the videos get noticed, helps the channel get noticed, and I really do appreciate it. I cannot stress that enough. All right, without further ado, let's go ahead and dive in. We got 3 games to talk about. Let's go ahead. All right, so game number 1 here on this slate is going to be Stanford heading to the Carrier Dome. Well, actually, is it still called the Carrier Dome? I don't know, but in Syracuse, they play in that big dome that they also play in for basketball, right? Well, Stanford's heading to Syracuse, and ironically, this is an ACC matchup, which just feels wrong on so many levels. But anyway, both these teams do always play on Friday night, so at least that kind of feels right. That these are kind of like the Friday night killers. So I do think that makes a lot of sense. But anyway, this is a pretty good matchup for DFS purposes. Syracuse is currently 8.5-point favorites with a game total of 57.5 points. Those lines courtesy of FanDuel Sportsbook. This means that the projected total is about 33 to 25 in favor of the orange. We do not do decimal points when we do implied totals, so 33 to 25 is what we're sticking with. And this is the highest game total on the slate. It's also tied for the closest spread on the slate. So if you're looking for one game to shoot out, one game to target, this would be that specific game, right? So let's go ahead and talk about the Stanford side. So for Stanford, they tend to play in a style that lends itself to high-scoring games. We've seen this with them in the last 2 seasons where they just get caught in these random shootout games. And the reason why is because they are kind of willing to play at the other team's tempo. Stanford wants to be a team that is run first, run heavy, and controls the clock and wins that way, right? But they're not very good. And so they tend to go down early, which tends to lead to them throwing more, being more aggressive. And they have a mobile quarterback with a cannon of an arm and an aggressive mentality, and they make a lot of big plays because of that. And so that's how you end up getting games shoot out. They don't usually shoot out because of Stanford, but if somebody else ignites the game, Stanford is willing to play at their tempo and willing to increase theirs. So that mobile quarterback is Ashton Daniels. He's priced at only $7,300 on this slate. And like I said, he's mobile, he's aggressive, and it looks like he's going to be the starter. He came into the season with a little bit of a quarterback controversy, was supposed to be splitting snaps against TCU, and he played pretty much the entire game. I believe he gave up 1 or 2 series to the backup, but he's the starter. He can run, he can throw, he's aggressive. This is, to me, a boom or bust option. But at $7,300, I think that's a pretty good play for him. It's a great game environment, and I would rank him as QB3 overall out of the 6 starting quarterbacks here on this slate. And when you factor in price, I think he's a pretty good points per dollar play at that number. Now, for the running back position for Stanford, like we said, they want to run the ball. The only problem is that for DFS purposes, it's kind of a nightmare. It's a 3-man committee between Irvin, Davis, and Ford. And Irvin is kind of the leader of it. He's kind of the best back, but he has not had a ton of success in the ground game. Against Cal Poly, he did have 2 catches that totaled 92 yards, but hasn't had a whole lot of success on the ground this season. The one that I'm actually the most interested in of the 3 is Micah Ford, not because of his rushing efficiency, but because he is involved in the passing game. We saw it against TCU. We saw it against Cal Poly. limit his involvement in the passing game. So if he's going to be playing and catching passes, especially in a game that's going to be shooting out, I think $3,700 is not a bad option for Micah Ford. This is a good segue to talk about last Friday night. And I'm not talking about the Katy Perry song. I'm talking about what happened on the DFS slate last Friday night when we had UNLV Kansas and we had Kansas State Arizona, right? So on that slate, I actually had a very profitable slate. I cashed big time in the coffin corner. My 20 max, almost all 20 of my lineups cashed. It was a good day, right? The reason why is because I had the correct player take that last Friday you needed to have Ted McMillan and 2 of the top 3 running backs and then 2 quarterbacks in your lineup, right? So I was building my lineups with 5 expensive guys in mind. And to fill out those lineups, I had to play some punts. Now, did I land on the exact combination of punt plays? No. What do I mean when I say punt play, by the way? I mean a guy who's priced under $4,000 that is super cheap, allows you to get to the high-priced guys, and on a 2 or 3 game slate, they're much more viable because it's much more likely that the mid-range fails on a 2 or 3 game slate, and you could get just enough out of these punt plays that if the superstars shine, then you're going to need those superstars in your lineup, and so the punt plays, you need to fill it out, right? So I think Micah Ford could be one of those punt plays that if you're sitting there thinking like, dang, I think I need this guy, then Micah Ford can be a punt play that you can go to make all of those other guys work. And he's going to be in my lineups for that reason here this Friday night slate. Now, at the wide receiver position, Stanford's got a pretty clear rotation. Alec Ayamanor, had that breakout game against Colorado last year where he had like 50 plus fantasy points. He is their wide receiver 1, only 4 targets against Cal Poly, but he did have 12 targets against TCU. I would prefer to look at the TCU game for their usage because that was against, an actual FBS opponent. And he's just going to be the guy. He's a big play threat. To me, he's a great play at $6,500. Can't stress enough how much I like Ayamanor as a play, but don't discount Ismail Ceesay. Reason why, he had a great game against Cal Poly. He had 8 targets in that game. He was their leader in targets, was their leader in receiving yards, scored a touchdown as well. Also has 2 carries in both games so far, meaning they are looking to get him the ball with design touches, which is super valuable in DFS, right? Because it means that he's not dependent on quarterback play in order to get the ball in his hands. $4,800 salary, I do like it a lot. I think Daniels is the quarterback that you might not need to necessarily double stack, but if you want to get a little leverage by playing Ceesay over Ayamanor, I think that's a pretty solid call. I think if you wanted to play both of them together, I think you could do that. I think there's enough salary savers out there, and the 2 of them aren't that expensive as a combo that you could certainly get to both of them. Tiger Bachmeier is kind of the 3rd receiver in this offense. He's a super talented kid, had some big games last year, but hasn't really had a whole lot of usage yet in the season. I would be leery of going to him. I would just rather play Ceesay for $300 cheaper. But we say this all the time in DFS. Sometimes a bad play becomes a good play when no one plays him and the guy goes off. Tiger Bachmeier is capable of going off. I just don't think it's very likely. And then Sam Roush is the tight end at $3,700. Stanford loves their tight ends. Like there's a few offenses in college football that you just know are going to target the tight end. Stanford, Notre Dame, Iowa, like they're one of those schools, right? So I don't mind playing Sam Roush at $3,700. Again, he's another one of those punt plays that can make a lineup work, and he's going to be involved in the game. Now, on the Syracuse side, Syracuse has been literally like the most stackable team in DFS all season. I've made some money off of these Syracuse guys, and I'm actually yet to click Kyle McCord into my lineup. Well, I'm going to be clicking their quarterback, Kyle McCord, into my lineups here this Friday night slate. He is $8,400. He's had over 32 fantasy points in both games that he has played so far this season. And look, whatever the concern was at Ohio State last year, and admittedly, I don't think he looked great. He has not looked like that quarterback at Syracuse. He looks like a totally different guy. He looks great. He's thrown for over 300 yards in both games. He's got a great matchup against Stanford, who gave up a ton of passing yards to TCU in week 1. Love Kyle McCord in this game. Going to be playing him a lot. And like I said, he is a very easy guy to stack. And the reason why is because this offense is so concentrated and so condensed, right? My comparison would be, think about like the Los Angeles Rams in the NFL. You know that it's going to be Kyron Williams at running back every single down. You know that when they're healthy, which they're not right now, it's going to be Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp every single down in the game getting targets, right? Syracuse is like that on the college level, and their running back is LaQuint Allen. He is a workhorse. He's seen 15 carries in both games. He also gets usage in the passing game. He's caught 9 passes so far this season, and he's had even more than that in targets. I think he's a great play. I think you don't necessarily have to be mutually exclusive with McCord and Allen because of Allen's use in the passing game, because of how concentrated and condensed this offense is. I think you can play both of them together. Now, it's quite expensive to do so, but I think it's quite likely that those two guys in the slate is two of the highest options at their position. At the wide receiver spot for Syracuse, their top receiving option isn't even a receiver. It's tight end Arondé Gadsden II. He is great. He is probably just like, I feel like calling him a tight end is almost cheating. He's kind of like a Kyle Pitts type where he can line up out wide, he can line up in the slot, but he is technically a tight end on the depth chart. He's had over 25 fantasy points in both games so far. He has had 20 targets so far this season through 2 games. That's quite a lot. Love him at 6,900. Easy stacking option with McCord. The other easy stacking option with McCord is wide receiver Trevor Pena. Pena has had 14 targets so far this season. He's another one like Cisse for Stanford. He's getting design touches. He's getting the ball in jet sweeps. He's getting the ball on screen passes. He's getting the ball in RPOs. They're getting him the ball in his hands, and he's done a lot with it. He scored over 25 fantasy points in both games. They're both reasonably priced. I think you can stack McCord with Gadsden or Pena. I think you can stack them with both. I think that if you're playing multiple McCord lineups, you can mix and match. That's tougher to say than I anticipated, but I do think that these are two guys you definitely want to be getting some exposure to here in this 3-game slate. Also, I'm not going to give up on the other stacking options. Amari Hatcher, kind of like back from the dead against Georgia Tech. He was not a good fantasy option last year and at the start of this season, but against Georgia Tech, 5 catches, 67 yards. That's like nothing to sneeze at, right? $5,200. He could be a pivot off of Gadsden or Pena, but he's certainly not going to be as regularly involved in the offense as those two. A guy that is regularly involved in the offense, but to me doesn't have the same ceiling as Pena or Gadsden, is Zed Haynes. He's caught 4 passes in both games so far, for a total for 8 for 97 on the season. He's only 4,600. I do think you can use him as a bit of a salary saver if you wish to, but like I said, this Syracuse offense is super stackable. You got McCord, you got Allen, you got Gadsden and Pena. Take your pick. I think it's highly likely that one or more of them ends up being in the optimal lineup at the end of the night. And like I said, I've played Gadsden and Pena a lot all season. I played Allen a lot all season, and I'm yet to play McCord. So like you can play these guys and win money even if you don't have the quarterback and you just happen to get the ancillary players right? So I do think that you can play any combination of those 4 guys, but if you're looking to get different, it's Hatcher and Haynes. All right, that's going to do it for game number 1. Let's take a quick breather, and then let's talk about the last 2. Now, before we get started with the battle in the Big Ten, I do want to mention there is a few places where you can get more information from me. First off, you can follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. I am more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. A lot of what I do on these shows is get the research in and get the research out to you guys early. So sometimes, opinions change, injuries change in between now and kickoff. If you got any questions about how I'm feeling closer to kickoff or if anything changes reach out to me on Twitter. I'm more than happy to answer questions. And follow me. You'll get all updates from the show as well. I'm also in the Fantasy Corner Discord. Fantasy Corner Discord is entirely free. It is a great place to talk DFS with a bunch of really smart, really good people who play DFS for all kinds of different sports. I'm talking NFL, NBA, MLB, college football, college basketball is another big one in there that I'm a big part of. And so if you're looking for people to talk DFS with, come on in, join in on the fun. We're talking lineups and plays all day long and then sweating it out when the games start. It's a blast to be a part of. I cannot recommend it enough. And then if you want to know who actually makes all of my lineups, head on over to the Patreon, patreon.com/Mike's Money Picks. For every single college football slate, I profile my core plays as well as why they're my core plays and kind of where my thoughts are on ownership and strategy for the slate. I'm not just going to sit here and guarantee that you can win thousands of dollars by playing them because that's just not how it works. And anybody who does promise that is lying. But I do think that you can get sound advice, sound research from somebody who knows what they're talking about with this stuff and help improve your process and become better at playing college football DFS in the process. All right, so that is going to do it for that. Let's go ahead and now get started with game number 2, Illinois taking on Nebraska. So this is the lowest game total of the slate, but it's not like super ugly. Nebraska is currently 8.5 point favorites with a total of 44.5. My math was a little bit wrong on the projected total here. So I believe if I'm doing my math right now, Nebraska will be projected to win this game about 26-18. Yeah. Imagine that, a high school math teacher that did his work wrong on this, but at least I recognized it before I totally gave y'all a totally wrong total, right? So 26-18 is the projected total in favor of Nebraska. For Illinois, Luke Altmaier is a solid dual threat quarterback, but he hasn't been super great so far this season. His biggest game was against FCS competition, hasn't ran the ball a whole lot. This is going to be the best defense that he's played. He's cheap. He has upside. He's not my favorite quarterback play on the slate, but I do think he's going to make my player pool. This is a weird slate to me where I can make an argument for all 6 quarterbacks. All 6 are going to be in my player pool in my 20 max lineups. I can tell you that straight up. So Altmaier is going to be in my player pool, not the one I'm the highest on, though. At the running back spot, they've got Caden Fegan, who is their workhorse. He just hasn't really turned it into a big game yet. And if you look at it, it's because he doesn't break off explosive runs. He's kind of like a Derrick Henry type where he's just a massive human and he just runs through people and wears you down as the game goes on. He's not super involved in the passing game. He's not super likely to break off a long run. But at $5,200, you got a guy who's got a guaranteed workload. If he punches in 2 touchdowns, he's going to instantly pay off his salary. I don't mind it, but he's not my favorite play. At the wide receiver spot, we've talked about how for Illinois, they have had a volume monster at wide receiver in years past. His name was Isaiah Williams. Well, now they've got 2 of them in that role. Pat Bryant is sitting here at $6,000. He has had 2 big games so far this season. One against Eastern Illinois, one against Central Michigan. I mean, he's getting a ton of targets, right? So I definitely think he's got to be in consideration. If you don't go with Bryant, go with Zachary Franklin, who had 9 catches in the Kansas game, the one that Pat Bryant did not go off in, and ended up with 17 fantasy points in that game. Both of these guys have kind of alternated big games. I wish I could tell you a lean either way for which one's going to go off in this game. I think overall Franklin is the more talented player, but these 2 guys are going to see a ton of volume. They're the only 2 Illinois receivers that I'm considering. I think you can play them as one-off plays, and I do think you can play them as stacking partners with Luke Altmaier, but those are the only 2 guys that I'm looking at. On the Nebraska side, they have got Mini Mahomes, Dylan Raiola at quarterback. And look, I think he's overpriced. He's just too expensive to me. He doesn't give you a whole lot of rushing upside. This isn't a great game environment. This isn't an offense that's going to pass the ball a ton. I just don't really know, like we typically want 3 times the salary for, points in DFS, right? So at a salary of $8,000, we want 24 fantasy points. I just don't know what his path to that is. Like, is it 300 yards and 3 touchdowns? That's not super likely. Is it like something like 240, 2 touchdowns and some rushing? Like, I don't know what his path to a ceiling game is just yet. He's going to be in my player pool, but he's not going to be in there a lot because I think the salary is a little much. I think there's better points per dollar plays out there, including Ashton Daniels that we already talked about in the Stanford Syracuse game. And I think price adjusted, I think Altmaier's a better play as well. At the running back spot, it's been committee central for Nebraska so far this season with Dowdell, Johnson, and Irvin, which sounds like the world's worst law firm. But Dowdell has been the guy who has kind of been the leader of that committee in recent games. He had 17 carries against Colorado. That was the game that was the closest that they had played, the one most representative of what they're going to play down the road. So it would kind of stand the reason for me that Dowdell is going to be their guy going forward. $5,500 is not a bad price for him. And Kansas's Devin Neal did run for over 100 yards on this Illinois defense, so they have been gashed by the run before. I don't mind it. I think if I'm talking about the Nebraska offense in general, Dowdell was probably the guy I'm most likely to play. At the wide receiver spot, Isaiah Nair, the Texas transfer, is wide receiver 1 on the season for them in terms of his total production, but it was really just one big game. I don't mind it, but he's not like my favorite wide receiver on the slate. Jamal Banks is a Wake Forest transfer. He is a big play waiting to happen, and unfortunately for him, it just hasn't really happened yet. I do think he's got to be in consideration at $4,700. He hasn't done a whole lot this season, but he is still out on the field all the time. And then you've got Barney, who is the most targeted player against Colorado. Didn't turn it into a whole lot of yards, but he was their most targeted player in their closest game so far. So I think for Nebraska, those are the 3 receivers that I would keep it at. I think you can play him as one-off plays. I think certainly if you play Raiola, you want to stack him with one of those guys. But like I said, this is just not really my favorite offense to target. This is not really my favorite game environment to target. So I do think that you can avoid these guys if you wanted to. Last on the night, we have got game number 3, San Jose State heading to Pullman to take on Washington State. Future Pac-12 matchup, by the way. Washington State is 14.5-point favorites in this one with a total of 55.5 points. This is the biggest point spread of the night, and the projected total is about 35-21 in favor of Wazoo. That gives Washington State the highest team total on the slate. If you're looking to stack up one team, they're probably the team that's most likely to just score 40-plus points. But San Jose State's not just going to let him do that. They have Doc Emmett Brown at quarterback. Yes, Emmett Brown, the same name as the Doc in Back to the Future, right? So to me, he's a pretty safe play at 6,500. This offense is going to throw, especially in a game that they're projected to lose. And so I think that you're going to get a ton of passing volume from him. I think that he's going to be able to throw for a lot of yards and a few touchdowns. And if the offense has success, it's going to be because of him. There's a chance that this offense just totally gets blanked out. And I think that's a possibility. But if they don't, it's likely that the Doc is going to have a whole lot of success. Now, I just wish I could use one of the Doc's time machines to tell me how he's going to do and, kind of make some money off of this slate like old Biff Tannen did in Back to the Future Part 2. But anyway, great series of movies, by the way, Back to the Future. If you've never seen them, if you're a younger person out there, you haven't seen Back to the Future, go watch the first two. You can skip the third one. The first two are great, though. At the running back position, we've got Floyd Chalk was their top back through 2 weeks, 33 carries through 2 weeks. And then for whatever reason, he only had 3 carries against Kennesaw State, and they went for negative yardage. I scoured Twitter. I did not watch that game. I'm sorry. I don't have time to watch every single college football game. I didn't get to watch San Jose State versus Kennesaw State on Saturday. I scoured Twitter, saw if I could find anything on an injury, on a benching, anything like that. Couldn't find anything, so I don't know why he only had 3 carries against Kennesaw State. He's going to make my player pool just because what if he does happen to go back to being the workhorse that he was in week 1 and week 2, but that's certainly a concern. The price tag certainly makes him easy to pallet. Bates was the guy that did have the most carries against Kennesaw, 11 carries, but he was just okay with him. Like, I think you can avoid this running back room entirely, but like I said, I'd be more inclined to go back to Chalk considering he had those first 2 good games. At the wide receiver position, like I said, this offense loves to throw, right? Well, they love to throw to Nick Nash specifically. In 3 games so far, he has had 19, 9, and 15 targets. It's insane. It's just utterly insane. It's an average of 14 targets per game. That is just an insane workload. 2 of those games, he's been over 40 fantasy points. He obviously has the highest ceiling of any skill player on this slate, probably has the highest floor of any skill player on this slate because this team's going to be throwing, and they're going to be throwing to him. So with Nick Nash, definitely a guy that I'm going to be considering. Now, don't count out wide receiver 2 Justin Lockhart. I think Lockhart could serve as a little bit of leverage over Nash if you're not going to play Nash. Lockhart had 12 targets against Kennesaw State, had 7 targets in week 1 against Sacramento State. So this is a guy that's also a significant part of this offense. Don't count him out. Like last year, these 2 guys are both a part of this offense. The gap was not that much between these 2. So I'm not going to count out Lockhart. I do think Nash is the top overall receiver play on the slate, but don't just X out Lockhart. He is the only other receiver that I'm interested in this offense, however. All right, now let's talk about Wazoo. So Washington State, they got quarterback John Mateer, who to me is the top overall quarterback on this slate, and I don't think it's very close. He's been over 30 fantasy points in every game. He has major rushing upside, 37 total carries in the last 2 games. That's a lot. So he does not need to be played stacked, and this is the offense with the highest projected total on the slate. Absolute smash play, top quarterback on the slate. He's quite expensive, though, so if you want to get to him, you're going to have to find a way to cut salary somewhere else. At the running back position, they've kind of got a little bit of a committee going on. Wayshawn Parker has been the leader. He did not have an effective game against Washington, but he still led them in carries, still was the most effective rusher. $5,100 is not an unreasonable price tag for him. The second guy is not going to attempt to pronounce his first name, Schlenbaker. He's kind of been the second guy over the course of the season. Pulasi did get a slight bit of work in week 1 against Portland State, but I don't think he's a big factor as we go down the stretch of the schedule and this team starts playing more higher stakes games. At the wide receiver spot, the good news is with Washington State is you know who it's going to be. Well, sort of. You know it's going to be one of 3 guys because these 3 receivers, Hudson, Meredith, and Williams, play pretty much the entire game. Their production so far has been pretty close to even when you add it all up. They've just gotten there by different ways, right? Hudson had a big game week 1 against Portland State. Didn't do a whole lot against Texas Tech, was just okay against Washington, whereas Meredith had the big game against Washington, 7 receptions for 111 yards and a touchdown, 27 fantasy points in that one. And then you had Kyle Williams with the big game in week 1 against Portland State, 33 fantasy points, hasn't done a whole lot since. So if you're just looking at those patterns, right? That would lead me to believe, with Meredith being the biggest producer in the Washington game, that he's likely to be the biggest producer in close games and in games of consequence. So that would be the guy that I would be wanting to target the most. Just my personal opinion on the 3 receivers. I'm going to be playing all 3 of them because, like I said, I'm going to be playing a ton of John Mateer. I don't think you have to play him stacked, but Meredith would get my vote for number 1, followed by Hudson, followed by Williams. All right, but that is going to do it for this slate, guys. That is a real quick rundown of the Friday night slate. We got 3 games in. We did under 25 minutes. That's pretty good. So if you have not already, if this video helped you out in any way, please hit the like button. It helps me out a ton when you guys do that. And go ahead and subscribe to the channel. That way you can be with us for the rest of the college football season and NFL season and PGA Tour season and college basketball season when it starts up in November. All right. And also, if you do want some more information from me, remember, reach out to me on Twitter, join the Fantasy Corner Discord, subscribe to the Patreon, get those articles. And if you're going to try anything new this season, you're going to sign up for a new sportsbook, new DFS site, new player prop site, head on over to signupexpert.com/MikesPicks. We're partnered with Sign Up Expert, and what they do is they get you the best offers and promo codes for new users on any DFS player prop sportsbook site, and they sync it to your location to show you what is legal in your state or province. All right, but that's going to do it for this episode, guys. Best of luck to you guys on this Friday night slate. I think that last Friday, by the time the slate rolled around, I had a pretty good read on it. I think that a lot of the takes here on this episode, I do think I have a pretty good read on it. I just need to see, I need to tinker around a little bit more and see just how I want to build the lineups, but we certainly know who I think the top plays on the slate are. So hopefully I was able to give you guys plenty of good information in order to build your lineups for this Friday night slate. Go check out the Saturday main slate video if you have not already. Saturday night slate video coming out tomorrow night. But anyway, thank you guys for watching the list to this point. Best of luck to you guys on the Friday night slate, and I will see you guys next time.